Here we go.
Good afternoon and welcome to the May 2022 edition of the Broadstone Reading Stage. I'm Larry Moore, publisher of Broadstone Books, and I'm delighted to kick off an afternoon of poetry featuring two longtime friends, plus an author I'm enjoying getting to know better, as you all will along with me today, John GLOWNEY, who is going to be reading together with Michael Joyce and Thomas Zemsky, who is here with me, here at my side today. As a genre, poetry is a very broad category, embracing an almost infinite number of styles. And Broadstone readers, especially those of you who've been attending our events over the last several months, know that we also embrace a very wide range of wide variety of poetry and poets. So without attempting to rank poetic forms or content, and certainly without picking favorites among our many authors, I do want to say today our three authors are distinguished through their exquisitely attuned attention to language, as well as the intensity that they bring to their various subjects. What also strikes me about these three particular poets is how they illustrate the many different trajectories by which one may come to poetry. So let's take John GLOWNEY to start. He's recently retired from the legal trade. I hope I'm not divulging anything he doesn't want to share, but just this past week, I was observing to Stephanie, my partner, that the two vocations in which the precise meaning of words matters the most are the law and poetry. So it's no surprise that John is our latest author to bridge these worlds. Honesty is what we demand, he declares in the poem Proof of Life. And throughout his debut collection, Visitation, it is honesty that he delivers. Hard truths about contemporary life that arrive in burning, burnished words. At the outset, he defines visitation variously as a special dispensation of divine favor or wrath, a severe trial, or an official visit for inspection or supervision. His poems indeed constitute an inspection and a document of wraths and trials. And trials, a word that I use here with no sense of irony or punning. Dare I say, it's an interrogation of our universe, a universe that's broken from the beginning, that nevertheless gives us life, the total stranger to which we owe everything. Now, this is heady stuff, especially for a debut collection. And the verdict is that John delivers. Michael Joyce, a highly distinguished emeritus professor of English and media studies at Vassar, might seem the more expected pedigree for a poet. And his 17 previous books, two of which I'm proud to say we published before his most current collection, and his many digital works span a career as novelist, poet, critic, theorist, digital literary pioneer, and multimedia artist. Busy guy. His poetry is marked by deep erudition, steeped in a rich brew of religions and philosophies, both Western and global, and drawn from many language and cultural sources. But his new collection, Capricorn, Venus Descendant, is also his most deeply personal, almost shockingly so in his frankness and vulnerability. Still, his joy, indeed his impishness with language, is revealed in his subtitle, 50 Poems of Pandemos, Karkinos, and Eros. We all recognize Eros, and after the past couple of years, we've become only too familiar with Pandemos. But Karkinos sends us to the dictionary to discover that these poems are also inspired by his experience of cancer, yielding an awareness of how they arise from confrontation with mortality, a personal crisis wrapped within the global one. At the core, these poems are about the redemptive power of love and intimacy, which affords space for joy and mirth, the sacred and profane, entwining in wickedly delightful ways. These are mature poems in every sense of the word, and they contain, like the dream that the she at the center of the poet's life has at one point in this book, everything. That brings us to Thomas Zemsky, sitting here at my side, so I have to be very judicious in my words about him. His relationship with books is the most physical of our poets here today, since he spent a career schlepping an incalculable number of volumes around the warehouse of the International Book Project here in Kentucky. Now, somehow that experience has not soured him on books. In fact, he lives quite literally surrounded by thousands of them. But it is funny that the opening poem of his latest collection, Elephant, pokes fun at the many non-literary uses for a book, and we'll probably hear that one today. It certainly hasn't spoiled him or soured him on words and the wonders that can be worked with them. Tom is what I think of as a pure poet. His work both hermetic in the sense of his observational vantage, and hermetic in that his work draws from deep wells of sometimes arcane learning, with metaphor at the center of his program. His language is kaleidoscopically rich, even if sometimes it can leave a reader hanging on for dear life, trying to keep up with the fabulous dexterity of his thought. So, a lawyer, a professor, a warehouseman, all profoundly serious and accomplished poets. It's my pleasure to present them to you today, beginning with John GLOWNEY. John.
Thank you, Larry. I appreciate the opportunity to read. I want to give a shout out to my two fellows. I've bought their books. You should too. They are wonderful experiences, and I'm enjoying and admiring them as I go through them. Every poet is on a mission of his own design, and every poem is on its own mission. So as introduction to my writing and what I think I'm trying to do, let me just give you two quotes before I jump into some poems. The first is, I write to find out what I think about things, which is, I think what I think I'm doing with this process. The second comes from a short quote from Mae Swenson, who's a poet who died many years ago, and I'm not terribly familiar with her work, but apparently on her gravesite, she has a bench and a little pedestal, and on the pedestal are the quotation from a poem of hers, which says, "Read me, read my mind." So if that little introduction to what I think I'm doing, let me start with the poems. Shelf life. I was thinking about this clever monkey skill we have for breaking open nuts and seeds and animal bones and tossing the leftovers out the cave window into a garbage heap as big as any giant termite mound in Africa. And how we thought we were so smart with our inbred kings sitting in big drafty rooms, wearing ridiculous crowns, while we landed our ships on other people's shores and claimed we owned them and looted in blood and smallpox. And how we sure knew what we were doing, pouring pavement across every meadow and feeding CO2 to the Great Barrier Reef and the glaciers of Antarctica until they choked. Trust me when I say that jackals will not finish us off by gulping down our marrow bones. Wind and rain won't level our skyscrapers, or book lice chew to pieces our impressive histories. Even when we're gone, we'll still be here. At the bottom of the Mariana Trench, a plastic bag, flag of the race of humans. This next poem comes from the experience of riding the bus many years ago when I rode the bus to go to work as a lawyer. And this came out of the experience of one day when a gang of skateboarders, young boys, climbed on the bus. And that was the origin of this next poem. Know Thyself. Know Thyself is the vibe of the gang of philosophers who crowd onto my bus this morning with their skateboards and flamboyant hair, their wisecracks and snickers and phenomenal youthfulness. They give me the side eye. Old guy, nice suit, briefcase, tie knotted at my throat, sizing me up. The years grind, the acid drops, heel flips and ollies I didn't land. They know there's not much in this world worth the effort, except that moment of catching air. It's like crawling under your own skin, the way some Alaska natives, in winter's deepest snow, will dig down through blue ice to a rocky shore, exposed when the salt water ebbs, to gather fresh mussels, and staying there just long enough before the tide covers you on your little scrap of earth under a temporary sky. This next poem is started out, well, came to me watching a movie, the name I don't recall, but the plot involved shoving the murdered body out of a plane into the desert at some point, and that ended up in this poem. The universe. The universe is a body shoved out of a plane at 30,000 feet without a parachute, sunk into the asphalt of a parking lot, like one of those sinkholes in a Florida subdivision. Its broken bones pointing this way and that, giving conflicting directions about the planet's silky strand of orbit wrapped around the sun. But some lazy mornings, out on the lake fishing, admiring the sunlit dragonflies flint and strike, the water striders skidding along their thinnest of lines, I remember how the universe pulled my body out of nothingness and pounded on my chest so I'd know it was love knocking. And I took my first breath, spitting up fish and seaweed. And so now I kiss the universe full on the lips. I give it mouth to mouth right back. The only honest thing to do when you owe a stranger everything. So let me kind of stay with the outer space theme here. This next poem actually does come from seeing a little boy's, which is the first line of the poem, but it comes from seeing a little boy's painting of the moon as a daisy. So that's where this poem found its origin. It's called Moon. She is the daisy, all crude lines and crayon, the first grade boy drew for his mother. She is a crumpled up letter. She is the reason why the teenage boy throws the stone at his father's eye. She lights the red fox's fur crossing the meadow, a silvery line ghosting bearded grasses. She stalks lovers and murderers. Her appearance and disappearance is a repeated chant, ancient breath of some greater lung. Stone-faced vamp, storehouse of whispered confessions. Shrunk thin as a razor cut, or ballooned big as a giant squid's eye. She returns every night to the sky out of spite, because she loves what she cannot escape. This next one is probably a lot more mundane in its origins. I literally was looking out the window one very hot Seattle day, which is a rare thing, but probably the middle of July, and looking at a little house wren out there and a few other things, and somehow that brought this poem to birth. It's called Truth. I've accumulated months and years of it, stuffed it into little drawers and canisters, tins and jewelry boxes, crammed decades of it into trunks and cartons and crates. And I was sitting at the kitchen table making a list when the past strolled in the back door and started in bitching about some insult or slight from some party or barbecue in 1973 nobody can even remember. And the kids keep running in and out, blinding lights sprayed everywhere like water from a sprinkler, and a house wren on the lawn asking nothing, and the tall spruce beside the hedge asking nothing. The kids getting a drink of water at the sink, laughing, making some crazy plan for the afternoon, something to do with string and popsicle sticks they've just invented, letting the screen door slam, tracking in dirt, running through all that empty space, all that light. This poem is probably somewhat self-explanatory. We have a local theater, so when I go to watch all my Marvel movies, I go to the Thornton Creek Multiplex, and I happen to be there, and the story is sort of told in the poem. Epiphany in the lobby of the Thornton Creek Multiplex Theater. When you are raised that John Wayne is the keyhole through which all time and space are framed, and now there are two fellows in the movie theater lobby who exchange a casual kiss. That kiss is the bullet that bears down on Wayne, grizzled, stoic, only this time he stumbles and falls. And the slender one, the other taller, both of them. And the girl behind the counter in her pastel pink uniform, and the stringy kid with the broom, and the woman on her cell phone, angry with her husband. Handfuls of clay and common earth, mud and wattles, throbbing blood, shaped to do only God knows what, apparently to love, only that, to love. I'm a fan of National Geographic magazine, and many years ago, I read a wonderful story about the Raja, if I'm pronouncing that correctly, which are a semi-nomadic ethnic group in Nepal who live by following the bees, as the bees follow the blossoming of the flowers and the trees through the lowlands. So that eventually evolved into this poem. I've got a little quotation at the beginning of it from one of the honey collectors, which seems appropriate. It is, you fall when your life is over. Stings. It is the path of the bees, nomadic, the flowering of the great green forest that draws them, that charts a life, a way, the secret of living by what stings you, the smoke in your eyes that lets you see how the queen commands the grand cottonwood, the limb where she has gathered all sweetness for her children, each with an ordained birth in this barracks of confection, and the sticky prick of thirst for the inflamed throats of flowers. The stunned bees erupt, released in smoke and fire. The honey collectors plunder the high nests, wring out the golden fruit into pots to sell. The bees needle and stab, and the honey collectors retreat in the evening, fingertips smeared with honey, their wrists jeweled with tiny stingers. Sleep is a cloud of wings humming and flickering in the mind's canopy, an indulgence of the exquisite pharmacology of hunger extracted from their meal of milky white wax laced with red pepper and salt. They do not become bees, but fall more and more in love with the climb into the towering silk cotton trees, where the gods live. A journey of many small wounds they must take each day. And let me make a little bit of a wild jump here, but I have admired and listened to John Coltrane as a jazz musician. And at some point I read a little bit of his history. And anyway, that created and it ended up in this poem called Coltrane Exhales. I thought maybe he could blow it all away, Train in his sax, wrenching the sickness up through the horn's bell, and not just the heroin that lay like a corpse of a river in his veins in those days, not just that, but the sound of the color black scraped down to skin and nerve and the booze to water he blew straight, the ache of the instrument unloading its scales, the wetted reed and embouchure and lips pulling a snarl of notes from the gut, that sweetness at the bottom he practiced years to, and nowhere to go but out. If I have time, I've got two more poems, and so that works. This poem, when I was working downtown, there was a blood clinic in the building next door, and so I would try to get over there when I could to give blood, as many people did. But it also sort of connects to other parts of my life at that time. And it ended up in a poem called Giving Blood. Volunteers all. The white-haired nurses, tan students, secretaries, wan businessmen line up for bloodletting. No blood factories, but a cottage industry. Piecework laborers paid in the coin of good citizenship. Have you had sex for money or drugs in the last 6 months, they ask? When the question we should be asked is, have we loved for sex? Did we embrace fully in our hearts those whose bodies, in carnal tide of night, opened and flowed with our bodies, those who, much later, having left our lives, leaving in us this tattered hole that only rents and unbinds further in the embrace of another, pass without speaking years later in the grocery. Our blood still leaps, the passion blush rising in our faces. The needle pricks a cruel steel nail. I'm left to siphon off the leakage of the heart pumps suck and throw. Drink ye all of this in remembrance of me. But here among the disembodied rabble, the thieves, the forgiven one and the unforgiven one, indistinguishable, it is a scientific transaction. No transubstantiation, no priests to assist, only nurses ministering sterile ligature. Only the rooms of the heartbroken lying on cots. Only the thin purplish red line of blood force-fed vein to vein, and we are transported into another's arms. This systolic embrace of strangers binding us blindly to another. This unrehearsed union between the pulse of bodies. Another heart healing across the common darkness with mine, red, cadenced, blessedly anonymous. And so let me finish with the title poem from this collection. It's called Visitation. And I think it's probably somewhat straightforward, explains itself. So, Visitation. My neighbor tonight is in his underwear, carrying out a bag of trash, a working class Santa. No robe, his spindly calves catching the sequined moonlight, like the face of the sickly kid in the war movie on the late night, will freeze up in the big battle. He's not drinking or cursing the dark or taking a drag on the faint firefly of a cigarette. He's just crossing the cracked and scored rectangle of the driveway/basketball court, wearing only white underwear and a pair of flip-flops that make an odd little tune, clip, clip, scrape, clip, clip, above the canned applause of a TV show, looping out of the window into the zombie slave glow of tonight's stars. And to the other hierarchical order of almost but not quite invisible beings for whom he's carrying this load of manna, to this unwashed audience awaiting bread crusts, coffee filters, banana peels, grapefruit rinds, leftover chicken pot pie. His mind is great and unknowable and terrible, and his thoughts play the die of chance or fate. And what he empties into that metal can may not be enough, or may not be in time, or will not last until the next visitation. But he has risen anyway from his TV and his bag of potato chips, as if he understood the role of a god is to atone for his long absences. Thank you very much for listening.
All right. Thank you so much, John. Wonderful poems, wonderful reading. I want to switch back over to gallery view here. Since one of your fellow lawyer poets is in the audience, Myra Malkin, and I hit her with this question when she read a few months back, so I feel it's only appropriate that I do the same for you. I did say in the introduction that you are of the legal trade. So again, two trades, two vocations, very much focused on precision of language. In what way, or do you feel that your practice as a lawyer informs your poetry, or perhaps vice versa, that your practice of poetry informs your language as a lawyer? Is there any crossover that you see in those two worlds of words?
It's a great question. Practically, poetry would fit in with I practiced at a large law firm, and there was a pretty large hour demand, so there was a lot of hours. So practically, I could fit poetry in. I mean, I could do it. And I was a litigator, so I wrote briefs a lot, and there was always discovering cases or finding cases and making arguments. But I have to say there was a bit of a yin and yang for me with it. Poetry was a relief from writing briefs. It was language, which I think at base I enjoy language. You know, it stirs the mind. But it was different, and it let me go some other places for myself that I didn't go otherwise. And I suppose to some extent, being a lawyer was a bit of relief from doing the poetry thing, because I could usually find answers in law. I can find a case or something that said what I needed it to say. That's not always true with poetry. Poetry can be very frustrating, and even after you've worked on it, it doesn't always offer any resource to go find the word. It just somehow comes when it comes, and or doesn't when it doesn't. So it was a bit of a balancing, I guess I have to say, for me.
Oh, tell us a little bit about your introduction to the world of poetry. I mean, how did you find your way into poetry and into being a poet?
It was really, thank you for asking. It was at the University of Michigan. I've dedicated this book of poetry to Professor Ned Creeth. And Ned wouldn't remember me and have any reason to remember me at all. He was about 6'10" and skinny and tall with a lovely beard, almost as good as yours, Tom, but not quite. He was, I took an individual study with poetry with him, and he was so kind because he didn't laugh, he didn't poke fun. He was just very gentle and really listened to me, which was something new to me. the other thing was the reading series at Michigan, which got me into it, I think. And I can't remember whether it was with Professor Creeth or Joyce Pesseroff, who I studied with there, gave me the book called Naked Poetry. And it was a bunch of modern poets, and they blew my mind. I read older poets in a little bit in high school, and I kind of liked it, but I didn't, jump at it. But I read those and just got knocked crazy, and it pretty much stayed with me from then on. I was sort of hooked in. So it was really the University of Michigan, which was a long ways from Bannister, Michigan, but it was where I first got hooked, and I've never gotten away from the hook.
All right. That's great to know, John. And also, I think this provides a good segue when you could be talking about the influence that a professor had in introducing your work. It's a good opportunity. I'll have you, John, I'll have you mute now, because I'm going to throw the mic over to Professor Michael Joyce, who will be entertaining us for the next several minutes. Michael, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Larry. I'm unmuted, I trust. It's a great pleasure and honor to be reading with John and Tom, and a special honor to join you, Larry, who fast become one of the major figures in publishing poetry in America. Amen. That said, it's Memorial Day weekend, and we are in a climate of death in this country, from my hometown of Buffalo all the way to Uvalde, Texas recently. And so I'm going to start with someone else's poem before I read mine. Mine are quite short, compact, single word titles, which takes the pressure off of having to match John's wonderful introductions. But I think we're all struck with a sense of Adorno's famous saying that to write poetry after Auschwitz is barbaric, to write poetry after all of these slaughters is barbaric, and yet we have to speak against death. Anyway, this is a poem by Sergei Chadon, who's perhaps the leading poet of Ukraine at the moment, who's born in Starobilsk, now lives in Kharkiv, in the Luhansk district, which is being bombarded at this moment endlessly. This poem goes back to 2017. The Ukrainians believe this war started in 2014, and they're correct. It's untitled. They buried their son last winter. Strange weather for winter, rain, thunder. They buried him quietly, everybody's busy. Who did he fight for, I asked. We don't know, they said. He fought for someone, they say, but who? Who knows? Will it change anything, they say? What's the point now?
Okay, 1 second.
Will it change anything, they say? What's the point? Am I there? Yes. Okay. I would have asked him myself, but now there's no need. And he wouldn't reply. He was buried without his head. It's the third year of war. They're repairing the bridges. I know so many things about you, but who'd listen? I know, for example, the song you used to sing. I know your sister. I always had a thing for her. I know what you were afraid of and why, even who you met that winter, what you told him. The sky gleams full of ashes every night now. You always played for a neighboring school, but who did you fight for? To come here every year to weed dry grass, to dig the earth every year, heavy, lifeless, to see the calm after tragedy every year, to insist you didn't shoot at us, at your people. The birds disappear behind waves of rain, to ask forgiveness for your sins. But what do I know about your sins? To beg the rain to finally stop. It's easier for the birds who know nothing of salvation, the soul. I'm going to move on to my own poems now. The first poem is called Blankets. I'm going to read the first and the last of the poems, and then in between enough to touch down on each of the three themes of the book that Larry mentioned and that were there in Greek. this one, the first poem I hear a great deal about from readers, including my good friend Cindy Coggins Mosher and even our college president, Betsy Bradley. So I couldn't leave it out. And it's the one that started it all, and that'll be the last introduction we'll get. This one's called Blankets. The sweet burrowing beneath, embrace of distant wave translated to mere thrum down among tropic flats where seeming weightless, the ray, all muscle and tendon, swims. Silk and billowing become his palm steady pressure along the flank and buttock. The nights of becoming wrapped in rapt thrashing gone into something gentler. Fog of exhalation settling over the river, rising, then sailing off beneath the sun. Nocturnal choreography embossed there, veins of pulp cooshed onto the damp felt. This next poem is called Freeze, F-R-I-E-Z-E, and begins with the title of the collection, Capricorn. Venus descended, limbs like a fawn's delicate pirouette or the surveyor's tripod unfolding. On point precisely for this moment, bathed in the blue nightlight. Swallows origami emerging beneath the cove of the moon, as seen from within herself. Given now to the one gifted with this calm, pale wave, and folded now into pure volume. Next poem is called Abrasion. Its verb, not the present tense of being a bride, though this flowering, burning now beneath the linen-wrapped ice feels a tiresome, tired insult, a litany of cliches of aging, cheeky jest, strawberry-colored, walked into, accident, nothingness given form. How the body fails us, but never fails to be itself. Her profile, he says, classical, worthy of a Greek vase, etc., yet does vault the steps on gimped knee, orangutan, his well-meaning embrace meant to be what love is ever, even under present circumstance. This poem's called Bowls, B-O-W-L-S. Holds an egg in her hand, two of them, juggles, fondles, smooths the scraps of feathery paper wet with the paste, forms it into a container for emptiness, feels the concavity beneath her palm, the chick, naked and engorged, arise and tipsy set off across the slippery surface. Oh, the wonders of men, she thinks, are their vulnerabilities. Their qualities also, which she lists in gold calligraphy upon each nested rim. Prosper, sage, or merit, Jake or Will, it's all one. No wonder the sky holds. Poem called Estuary. There, where the sea sleeps, she seeks to press against its flow, still point. The infant she never nursed nestles against her breast. Conch's single muscle latent in her lasping grasp gleams like a lost dream. Expanse of the strand, damp sand, a cushion underfoot. The horizon within reach, each breath the tide's distant message. Awake, turns to sleep, breathing deep decapod calligraphy etched and then erased as the creatures ease back in where the waters too now exhale. Lips met at the salt point, now part. This poem's called Sleep. From age 18, she's known to release what has to leave, not her, but this abode of glory and sadness. Felt the compact creature still gild, swim off into the firmament and miraculously take flight. Hesitant a moment as if light itself then settle midst the bright host occupying foggy hills and backwater, mesa and arroyo, radiant skim of pooling bioforms that give shape, for good or ill, to dreamscapes from which pollywogs crawl. Saints or monsters, lovers or specters, she's felt with fingers on her forearms years before the morning, however you spell it, began to foreshorten into seasons and pass. Next poem is titled Philosophische, German for philosophical. She asks him to locate the sublime in their house. Infinity in a shadow, unbearable canyon of all where. Wanton Alp of mountain in the breast, he suggests, barefoot, arched white beneath the red bathrobe. Rakuvas sitting just so on the narrow shelves of Wunderkammerlich boxes. Do you think, more like Joseph Cornell or Robert Motherwell? Her follow-up. Night games don't take passion's place, but augment and annotate it. The philosopher's son likes the smell of onions, she says, though he doesn't like to eat them, speaking of the past, in the present. And this poem is called Waltz. Their waltz that night to the saraband of Bach's Cello Suite No. 1, he proposes as literally intercourse. Maybe literarily, she supposes, though frankly has her doubts. There he goes again, she thinks, sweet old steer, yet when he recalls long ago tangoists seen along the colonnades at Place des Vosges, she stops holding him to such rigid definition. The knees scissoring insistence against the thigh and the passo belongs to whom? Lost in the loose quebrada, they pivot as one in the media luna. And when he says, a crystal stream rises from beneath the low notes, its dark current now a calming, gentle resonance, she waltzes the flow, presses their breasts to each. The poem's called Men. Suddenly, she shares a memory of learning to skate upon a flooded field at her husband's sister's farm after the birth of their son. Something she wanted to do for herself, the family they had wanted done, widening circles begun without yet really knowing how far she would circle. She had to see, in a way that phrase belies, really had to, with her eyes, as they say, who are always saying something mad. Proclaim the free flow of freedom as a rule, when for her, free is to know patterns before rhythms enter into the limbs. It's what frustrates watching the Tai Chi master on DVD together with him, happily flailing arms in circles, both of these men, while she tries to take it in. One husband long ago skating off, this one now here just as long. Disc spinning in the darkness of the machine, mastery not really impressed upon the silver rink within, but rather in the air before her as she sees it. This poem called Reticulate or Reticulate. In the mixed season, when the black limbs threaten to give themselves back to greening, the near cove covered over with a scud of little boats, he's afloat also, laterally rigged with red rubber tubing, a tug now, the tailored diaper like a codpiece. She finds him somehow sexy, and so he does also. They waltz, erect and supine along. It seems little more can happen to them, but that it shall. Life scrawls upon them, limb by limb, apparatus by appendage, and they augment. Splayed fingers fanned into serviceable caress, they cling and span. This poem's called Swans. The swans along the reservoir and wetlands beyond the highway as she drives do not glide, but nest in shallows illuminated by their radiant whiteness. So too with him. She drops him off outside the hospital and watches him go in. Time passes in the shadows where she parks and reads. He comes out a new creature, though still himself, not ashen as the others, nor raw, wet as a cygnet, yet chastened by the rays that chase what the pills cannot reach. Snatching him to her nest, she preens him like a new hatched cob, after which she turns toward home and bed. This poem's called Segments. Splitting the Clementine into what he insisted were segments rather than the sections that she called them, she thinks they will miss these interludes. Pastel spectrum of pale spring along the long corridor of highway there and back, a day, a week, a life of measures. He afterward rooting in the plastic sack for these pillows of plump half moons, orange as the day's end. White sap that used to signal some climactic given over to wheeze and clack of the tungsten leaves, rays that instead zap the dissecate taproot. Now he emerges from there to her, their sweet juice, and the road back. This next poem's called It. It has left him a ruined isle just offshore of her. What, quote, it, he cannot say, nor why he takes the long way windward where the sharp stones stand and not the lee strait across which she reaches him on each side of the night, beach or strand. It is just words. He's less weary now, yet cannot stand without pushing awkwardly from the chair, feeling the bare wire there where it attaches, the awful thrill of its pain to burnished bone. It is not the disease, which to a water woman has both its name and spiny emblem, jeweled pincers like the Cape's far reaches out past Piney Point, crab shape of the pond she painted after her other sailor took her inland all the way to Kansas. This one, she thinks, was also a seaman in another life. The way he rocks once up, as if on wooden legs, erect, a wreck, it is his to say. It's a poem called Limp. That the term could twice befall him, they cannot have imagined. Of co-hyphen or incidental to or in him, they expected only the latter. All this logic tripped up by one muscle or another, he cries out at the threshold of each. It's the one she cannot reach, pedestrian that weighs her down. Resist guile or trance-like patience, cannot be teased by silk or oil, beckoning finger or the palm's invocation, lone witness of the drilling pain she remembers only thrice before. She knows pain is metallic, its taste lingers. They ask you to push, then not, then they take it away unfairly before you've had a chance to hold it, soothe it at your breast, feel the beating merge with yours. He moves from room to room as if in rosined goatskin slippers, feeling for the wire cable, her own foot modeling the orchid's furrow. Another flower here, a poem called Garland. What comes to mind at this distance is a simple garland of amaranth. Two flowers strung with kitchen twine as if by a magic child. A sorceress of sorts, simple red strand dropped unseen amidst the flurry of laughter and leaving. They witnessed 2 summers ago a large Indian family gathering up the picnic at the lapsing golden hour that flared upon brick-colored sand at Brackley Beach. Whirlwind of shook cloth, children circling, women gathering baskets and lifting the brass teapot from its tripod, a half-dozen handsome husbands flexing muscles, hauling coolers and dismantling the crimson canopy carefully around where Awa and Tata still lingered in their folding canvas chairs, watching the gold thread of Sonia's hem disappear above like threads of misty silver, already gaining tide by which the garland would be snatched an hour after. Now the last 2 poems, the first one called Summa, the first of the last 2, called Summa, S-U-M-M-A. They've been counting things, the sum of which they cannot calculate and, but not as a result, do not care about. It is, of course, too early for the characters of whatever comedy they think to appear in to say how their story ends, save that, pardon the pun, it involves a kind of salvation, a third body arising as flame does from a medicine bowl, where the secret lies less in the friction between the two bodies, as it does in precise tenderness, the nest of tinder lifted from the depression where the stick twists against the hollow, sparking it into a brief existence that can only be sustained by folding it back within itself. Fingers moving with insulated deftness, exploring the creases where the heat settles into both things and creatures, only to be drawn out again, not as the weaver draws pattern from wool, but rather as forceps snatch a raku bowl from a kilt at the fire's peak. And the last poem I'm going to read, and the last one in the book, called Sea, S-E-A, and it's written with Caroline Geyer. If one of us goes, she says, the other will launch into the ocean of interstice, waters of the upper seas, beneath which still this river flows the course we've set for it. Its tracery, a marriage of water and water. Our shared bed, its source, bodies embossed there like waves on sand. And the ocean above will know by heart the shape of the snaking river, shifting stones, bits of glass gracing its passage, a mosaic conjuring the third body. When one of us goes, he says, the other will already be there, where the two seas meet. Our love, a boundless estuary. Thank you.
Bravo, Michael. What a reading. You probably haven't been able to notice the chat while you've been reading, but Cinda Coggins Mosher, I think, speaks for all of us when she said she didn't think she could love these poems anymore until hearing you read them. And I say amen to that. That was an amazing reading, and I have to say that it struck me as absolutely Shakespearean in the language, in the depth of the language. Michael, I think I can share with folks that when you first approached me with this manuscript, it wasn't even necessarily with the expectation that it would be published as kind of a to say public a kind of volume. I think you're viewing it as maybe something that was more of a private work. So I want to say on behalf of everyone, thank you for allowing us the privilege of publishing these words. And I also want to thank the she who is in the center of your book, who's also in the audience with us today, Carolyn, for helping to inspire this work. As I said it in my introduction and was plain in your reading, intensely personal work. How different was it for you as a poet writing these poems? I mean, they're clearly your language. They're informed by your experience, but they seem to me of a completely different order from the other poetry of yours I've read. How do you feel like these poems relate to the rest of your work, and what was your experience of writing them?
Yeah, thank you for that question. I mean, that's the core of it. I'm really wary about saying something that, as a teacher, as a writer, I always kind of looked at with some skepticism, if not a feeling that it's all bullshit when somebody says it. But these poems literally wrote themselves. They were how I lived through the pandemic and how I lived through our journey. And they would arrive, and I'd be in awe. You know, I'd just be almost a stenographer. And fortunately, they have a kind of square shape and form, and their internal rhythm started to emerge, and I could see them come back again and again like waves. And you know, I'm so wary of the mystery of saying this, but they would show up and just sort of form into blocks. I had that image of those things that we used to have as kids, that we'd move these tiles until you got a picture of something or you know, a saying. And then and now I'll be giving away something. Then I would fold them into an origami and sneak them into Carolyn's napkins at lunch. You know, almost always she somehow didn't notice they fall out on the floor, and she'd say, "Oh, another one." So they became ceremonies for us. They became a way of living in the face of whatever it is we've all been living in these past years of pandemic and you know, being assailed by diseases of various sorts. I mean, I can find some roots for them in various writers who I've read, but they just really came as gifts.
That's wonderful to hear, and I think sometimes I say an artist, whether it's a literary artist, a visual artist, and you of course are both, we're vessels by which, you know, art comes into the world. So I think it was wonderful to hear about this experience of you opening yourself and allowing these words to come into the world. And I know I personally feel very blessed by them, and I'm very glad that you were willing to share such intensely personal experiences with us. So thank you very much, Michael. It's a great pleasure, always a great pleasure to hear you read. So that brings us, and I'll have Michael, if you want to mute yourself, I'll now, and this time I get to tilt the camera a little bit here, because our third poet reading today is Thomas Zemsky. And even though it says Larry Moore on your screen there, I assure you that this is Thomas Zemsky. Thomas, it's all yours.
All right. I feel quite daunted. I'm feeling kind of like I did in early poetry classes. I'll do my best, but I'm surprised at this. Anyway, I'm gonna try to read 8 poems, and 4 of them from this current book, and then 4 of them I'll talk about afterwards. There's 2 short ones and 2 a little longer. So, to a friend. I remember when you worked to establish a relationship with silence. I too need a friend now. One who can stop me with a look that goes under the trees, a look with the sun in it for the odd bones of us. And I wish you those rare moments of peace that lakes and hearts afford, and love's 2 wings disguised as hands and eyes, and the need and the isolation of buses and houses, to not have to write or call, to know that life is sometimes funnier than pumpkins, and that we are crazy as crickets about it in the company of our mutual friend. And a second shorter poem. You know, I could change. It's funny how there's a lot of overlap in a way of subjects. I'll change this. This is called Praise for a Crumb. Sometimes it is ants' bread I'm after. Their antenna tilted to one side like chef's hats. They pat it and pat it with busy feet. It's walking over the body of the queen, having eaten ants' bread, thick and sweet, having impossibly swallowed from the air the strangeness of my despair. Oh, you can brag that with thought the mouth issues forth whole grasslands of sky, with all nests of stars, can even travel in mind from one to another, far and numb. Is that what it means to an ant? I would like to know, but where in such a mouth could you taste the crumb? And then 2 longer ones. I'm not going to read a book. I hadn't decided to, so let's try what I've got in mind.
All right.
Ode to Capitalism. At least this will connect with Michael in a way. Capitalism is dead. Its counting house is a vast heart empty of blood, like a tree suddenly insubstantial as a cloud, Its green faded, taproot moored to air. That's capitalism. The paved streets and sidewalks that conveyed its life are meaningless in every direction. Their complex laughter is cold to the touch, while love's path is unplanned, somnambulistic. All those locked doors now seem less interesting than the rain that enters their keyholes. The play of light and shadow cannot be jailed in the treasure chest of the eye. The world teems with increase till it even gives birth to death among so many brothers and sisters. Why else this impulse to laugh at funerals? Everywhere is the commerce that capitalism feared. Still, it doesn't seem like capitalism is dead at all. Its acolytes are legion. They identify with the rose swaddled in tissue in a cardboard coffin. Their nightmare is to stand with all the currency stacked behind them, obliterating the horizon. Their skin drawn with the thought that there's not one coin more to obtain. What if we leave them there? Statues worthy of brambles, no matter. A trembling comes to the old gardener's hand that is like the flowers. The golden sound is better than the bell. The spontaneous combustion limited to printed dollars that exists in hay has the horses whinnying, and it is like a remembering of unicorns to a centaur, busy capitalists. When the accountants close their books, just think, and you are the money death counts. And this last one will be back. These poems were written earlier than the second book that was published, but this goes back to that idea of metaphor. I wish I could sustain it more. It's called Stick of Wood. Stick of wood, king, part alligator and part oil, part Jimson weed and part walnut, full of lightnings, cures, compass points, and theater. Tapped on the ground or beaten against stone, you are a doctor gently laying his head over the heart. A doctor who comes out of the woods, whose college is there, conferring degrees such as one in Romance languages and ancient languages as well. You master of Esperanto is instantaneous, inviting others to make entries in your dictionary. Dance with every slightest twist and turning of your body, secretly proud, your dark knot a perfect birthmark. Expressive as the firm white flesh of your open gesture, quickly intimate, discovering curses, grounding blows whose stale charge lay hidden in the bone like thunder in a clear sky. Water witch and warrior witch, your nose in the earth, midwife to toe-headed families of wheat, or in the air, a bit of colored cloth with its hands around your neck, looking down on green ranks of corn. Vain then, your face gaudy, painted with the wounds you deliver, or plain, hardly breathing, sweet bridge for the hands of lovers, saved from the hearth to be carved over with the birth of the world. Good friend to old age, drier and lighter each year, you glow by the hermit's side, not heeding the fires of current events whose confusion would blacken the heart. Loving sire, teacher, pleasing to ponder, childlike, stick of wood. All right, I'm going to read 3 poems from a manuscript that hasn't been published yet. I joke and say like this is my audition. We'll see anyway. This is called Poem from There. The concept of everything up to this point being available to me again is like the tracks trying to get down in time for the train. Whew, ouch. Remember is the 13th month. Thanks to gypsies, I no longer need to steal your God, or like a lonely cloud fall with a thud on Walt's querulous head. It's just that skin has such a wild imagination. It's hard to consider a mid-sized town with inflatable seasons on every other lawn, refusing the flights of a fiddler with wings, or one lousy Holstein over its oceans of straw, preferring light from so far away one can barely see enough to not turn philosophical, with silent auction, county fairs, Christmas and its pageant, here and other notions, like trains come back, hauling sighs and hours, together with iron shaped in the lineaments of desire. The snow that releases a dragon's breath when you hold it, come further. And in honor of our other person here, this one's called My Cat. My cat, an appellation he finds beneath refuting with anything less than aplomb, doesn't know what I'm thinking, oftentimes doesn't know what he is thinking. And maybe he is yet to laugh, but I've seen him lay out and with a twist, look at the world upside down. It isn't food, roof during a storm, thermostat, strokes from brush or hand that claim his passion, but ritual, the where and when, a master of astrology. Every hair not only remembers, but can stand up and recite. And if death is an answer man proposes for every part of the universe moving away from every other part of the universe with a speed that leaves light gasping in the dust, and if there is a somewhere and such as that, when my cat dies, the knowledge of which seems to have been the principal ingredient in its mother's milk, and if there's a God in or even as that place of time, my curious cat who did not question Cheops of the Sphinx, who watched dinosaurs fly into our trees, whose tongue was blackened with souls pouring from chimneys at Belsen and Auschwitz and Buchenwald, whose kin were strummed for songs celebrating those his kin helped also slay in battle, the Easter islands of lightnings introducing before and after worlds, while my cat remained silent, I'm confident would ask of him or her, or more likely unpronounced creator, and with cool interest, well, have you caught your squirrel? This is called Thesis. That's, I guess, the longest thing I'll read. You know, I've got one other that'll, I'll try to upset the apple cart. Thesis. I've come back from meeting Macbeth in the wilderness behind the shopping mall. Wild-eyed still, he wasn't haunted by the discarded broken debris in which time wallowed around us. His vision spoiled by his encounter with those three harpies and what they foretold. Stealth was the enemy he both claimed and pleaded, though it sounded more like what trees do as they grow together into a wood, or the steps night takes as a faithful camp follower of the day. Even as it approached our meager's hobo's fire while he spoke. The lights of the city could be seen dimming the kingdom of the stars, while we shared a screw cap bottle of promised magic among the empties shattered at our feet. And yes, I forgave him like an uncle newly discovered to me by none other than Charles Dickens, stepping out of the shadows to join us there. I would have stayed until they opened the doors on the dime store treasures on the other side of the walls, if I hadn't a father to fondly warn me of comfort's illusion, allowing my pillow and my bed to be firm as the dreams they might help engender. Yet knowing all the while powers are ever abroad, begetting spirits strange as a baby whispering in your ear, glacial little instructions to freeze your heart when they come out with that sound. For instance, an idea of the land as a place where one may hear the wind getting educated endlessly, as neither squall nor cry, while around you marked women change colleges into belfries. So this last one, and with some things that have been said, and I'm sitting here next to Larry, I'll say this publisher accepted, as we all know, but this is called To the Publishing Industry. The day continues to be issued in an edition of one that goes unread. And you've kept the lights on all night again. Frankenstein lights in which to incubate shape-shifting opportunities. Whether jealous or frightened or both, a pantry mouse with a tooth for shiny packaging. Penthouse in the woods that is set out on the curb on collection day. Shell game with charms shadows come in for better weather. And operating table where a candy store is put inside a kid. Your kindergarten of t-shirts that say, I want to know less, set ablaze in the likeness of truths that are best sold. Insomniac water as a paste to glue together the covers of another 100,000-eyed child, none dare to call a freak thing. I'm jealous and frightened myself. When did we stop going to the moon? Written in sloppy paint across the side of a rocket, the only page needed in my svelte memoir. Still a little night left, but you've kept the lights on. Please stop the presses and tell a lie among so many books for the remainder in us all.
Thank you. All right.
Good, I got a clap from the right person.
Okay,
You're not offended.
I think
You're not offended. You're not included.
well, you're getting claps from a lot of people, even if they're the silent Zoom variety at this point. But Tom, so wonderful to, always a joy to hear you read, and I think you alluded to this. I didn't say it in my introduction, but I think you mentioned that. Although this is the third of your books that we've published, I'm happy to say that I'm Tom's publisher. We've done this is our third collection we've done with you, but these poems were composed earlier, I think, than the ones from Elephant. The ones from Elephant, yeah. Actually, I should say the one he was reading there at the end, he was actually reading from a literal manuscript. It was handwritten, so right. That was nice to see. What that makes me think about, Tom, is that more even than most of our poets, I feel like that I know when I'm reading a Tom Zemski poem. I mean, you have such a clearly defined voice and style that even though these earlier poems, they may have been composed before some of the ones in the other volumes, you just seem to have found your footing, found that voice. So I guess my question to you, what that leads to, is how did you do that? I think this is kind of the craft question of the day, is how do you feel like you found your voice, and how did you know when you found it? How did you reach that point of comfort with that?
All right, I still don't know that I have, but two ways. One, how did I get into poetry? Because I'm so uncertain about myself and was pretty sure I was so crazy. I wanted to try to find some way to deal with it. So I was afraid of reading so many other poets, good poets, that they would just swamp me. I just don't have this strong enough sense of self to deal with it. And so I avoided that for a while. And then I discovered the strange thing that if you copy somebody else with great feeling and at length, your own voice comes out of that. If you do it long enough and sincerely enough, oddly, you don't just become an imitation of that other person. You start to become your own person. It's a strange thing. So that's one way. And the other way is to very extremely avoid reading other poets so that I wouldn't be influenced. So both things work that way. What I would do is fix on a few poets that mean a great deal to me and inspire me and somehow get me going, and not be widely read after that. So I'm not very aware of all the other good poets writing and out there, and I'm still as fearful as always of being swamped and losing what you say seems to be a voice that I have. So it's tenuous.
Mm-hmm. That's great. Fascinating for me to hear that you have this almost a kind of approach avoidance sort of thing with other poets.
Yeah.
I'm kind of fascinated that poetry seems to be the one thing that everybody thinks they can do, whether they have any training or any background or exposure. And I've even run across people who say that, well, I don't want to read other poetry. They want people to read their poetry, of course, but that they don't want to be tainted or influenced. So I think that's very interesting that I love that observation you made, that you can find your own voice through reading, and as you say, in a sense, kind of copying of getting inside and learning how other people have made their poems.
It's a magical, very quiet and slow transformation, but it does happen.
All right. Well, and that's a good point to say. Magical transformations are what this whole afternoon has been about. I mean, fabulous poetry from Thomas Zemsky, from Michael Joyce, and leading off today from John GLOWNEY. So let's all do a round of Zoom applause for all three. And we have just a few minutes left, and there's few enough of us in the room that I'll say, if anyone has a question or a comment that they'd like to make, I'll invite you for the next minute or few to unmute and step up, and we'll hear from you. So, anyone like to comment or ask something of our readers today, or any of our readers have anything they want to say to one another at this point? I'll say Michael and John can unmute if they want to, so they can all be part of the conversation.
This is John GLOWNEY. I put it in the comments there, but I wanted to agree with Tom. I do think eventually your own voice comes out. I was fixated on Robert Bly for a long time and James Wright. And I was copying them. There's no doubt early poems there, but eventually your own voice comes out, and you sort of get rhythms in your head, but then they turn into your own rhythms. And I just think that's almost inevitable. I really think that you will come out, and if you stick with it, you have to do a lot of it, but your voice will come out, and it will be whatever it is, good, bad, and different, but it will be your voice. At least that was my experience. So I just wanted to second Tom's observation there.
That's good. And I want to quickly say, because Richard St. John, who's in the room, asked a question that I meant to ask Tom, because you said there were a few poets that you kind of focused on. So I think he'd like to know who some of those are. And so would I. So.
Okay. Well, one that knocked me, just bowled me over, was Gregory Corso. Mm-hmm. Nobody sounded like him. He had I just like how outside of the norms of poetry, he just tipped everything over. Mm-hmm. I was real, and that's still, I still like it.
He's still a great favorite of mine as well.
Yes.
Yeah.
Then on a way to get into a poem, or just some poets stimulate your head and make you want to write, and some don't. I imagine John Ashbery is influenced and got a lot of people to write, and he doesn't work for me at all. Mm-hmm. But a poet that does is a guy named Alan Duggan. And he's dead, I'm pretty sure now. He's had about 8 books, but he's just got the most ability to grasp an idea with such concision. And he's very classical. And it's one thing I want to say about Michael's, what he read, although you mentioned Shakespeare, the thing I thought of when I heard those poems is a real leap to Greek. They're real. I just thought of like the Greek anthology or something. That's the thing that struck me. And I wasn't ready to hear a whole session of very erotic poetry, which is also very Greek in the way it was presented. So that there was that. I don't know. I lost my thought, I guess. But
Sorry.
no, that's fine. It was that was the response I had to those poems, though. I was really hearing Greek brought new into a modern thing, and just the way they would do it with just the erotic frankness.
So Michael, maybe no accident that you subtitled the book in Greek.
Oh.
Yeah, I guess not. You know, my father, who was a steel worker all his life, for his high school yearbook, wrote an essay in Greek. Back in he came through high schools in Buffalo, New York, in those days when you learned Latin and Greek. I'm afraid as much as I'm thankful for Tom's praise, the one thing that's Shakespearean about me is I'm like Shakespeare, I have small Latin and less Greek. I'm Jesuit trained. But I remember being driven out of the Greek classroom by Father Bosch because I hadn't done my homework and didn't know it. But it sort of enters your voice when you hear it enough, doesn't it? Can I jump in here about and just join the who do you read? For me, there are 2 poets that really come to mind. One quite young and a former student of mine by the name of Jane Gregory, who has poems that are published by Cave Song, and another extraordinary poet, maybe the most important poet still living in America today, Fannie Howe, who is the author of, I don't know, 60 books or so. America's best known, least known poet, I often call her, but who, like all of us today, I think that was one wonderful thing about this reading, participates in the world of poetry via the spirit, but also via the everyday, and you know, as a search of kinds. And so I just was terribly moved reading with these 2 gentlemen today.
I was just going to say that for me, there are poets that have shaped my life as a poet are totally invaluable to my life. And I would say Carolyn Forshé and Anne Sexton are those poets, as well as Sylvia Plath and Adrienne Rich. And I think for particularly the whole movement of women who sort of came of age and had a sense of their strong sense of being feminist and believing in themselves and in their bodies. Those poets completely transformed how I write. And I think kind of what we were discussing before, that it's not copying. It's a feeling of being, it's a sense of being infused. And that is sort of a change in consciousness. And then you find your own way to enter those, a sense of, for me, that poetry is larger than my own personal angst. It intersects with my own personal angst, but it is much larger. And I feel, you know, grateful to be with all of you today.
Well, and I'll do a shout out, Willa, that you have a forthcoming Broadstone book that's in our catalog coming up. So this is a good point to sort of talk us out here now. What a great great afternoon of poetry with John GLOWNEY, with Michael Joyce, and with Thomas Zemsky. And I will say, if you enjoyed today, I'm really happy to see so many of my Broadstone family here, and I know you do enjoy this sort of thing. So remember, we do this pretty much every month, and I'm happy to say that we will be back here in the Broadstone reading stage on Saturday, June 25th at 4 p.m. Eastern Time, when we will be hearing from Richard St. John, who is in the Zoom room with us here today. We're looking forward, Richard, to hearing you, along with Babo Kamal, who has a new book just out with Broadstone. So, and I think, Myra, are you reading next Saturday? Are you one of the readers that?
Yes, yeah.
I'm happy to say that Myra will be reading in person at the Persistence of Cormorants reading series in Brooklyn on Sunday, and I will be in the audience. Myra, I am coming.
Heard that. Yeah.
So I will be there with you. So to everyone who was here virtually today, thank you so much for spending a big part of your afternoon with us, enjoying some poetry. I will say, if you like what we do, the best way to show that support is buy the books from these wonderful writers. Stephanie has put links up in chat to where you can find them all, and just come to broadstonebooks.com to keep up with everything that we're doing. Great to see you all. One more round of applause for our readers today, and for all of you for attending. See you soon. Have a great Memorial Day weekend. Bye, y'all.
Thanks, Larry.